Here's the format for the evening. We've already begun the meeting, but we'll begin with chapter announcements. As you can tell, that's what we're doing now. And then we'll introduce the speakers. We begin with the speaker presentation around 7:10-ish, followed by at the end when they've completed. And that will be the rules of engagement, so to speak, for this evening. We'll have the presentation go on, allow our speakers to deliver their message. And then I would ask that you all type your questions into the chat. And then I will be reading them off at the end. But please, you're encouraged to ask questions. Also, I want to encourage you all to become a member. It is fun. I will testify to this. I've enjoyed my participation in this. I've been a member for, 4 or 5 years, and I've been part of the steering committee now for a couple year and a half or so, a couple of years. But here's our website. It's a good place to begin. You can join online and so on. Share your feedback. We want to hear it. I'll pause here momentarily. This is our email address, mdcres@cres-energy.org. Contact us if you wish. Let us know what you think. Provide us with feedback. Donate to support CRES if you wish. We're not only as a member, but as an organization. We're always looking for support, endorsements, what have you. We have memberships for corporations and businesses in the area that fit our mission. They're available if you wish to support us, throughout. Here's our Venmo number at MDCRES. For those of you who participate in Amazon, they have a feature that allows you to choose the charity of your choice. And if you're so inclined, please think of us. All right, onward, upward. I'm going to turn matters over to our speakers this evening. We've got tax policy for the renewable energy transition. Our guest speakers are Andrew Roush and Matt Kaden of Moss Adams. And I will just turn it over to them. I'm going to stop screen share. And Matthew, take it away, and I will mute myself.
All right. Thanks so much, Greg. Good evening, everybody. Matt Kaden here with Andrew Roush from Moss Adams. I think we're going to, I'll be sharing the screen. I think Andrew is going to lead off with a little bit about oil and gas incentives, just to sort of warm us up. And then we'll move into the sort of Inflation Reduction Act stuff that applies to renewables. And then I look forward to having a fun Q&A after. So I'm going to put the slides up here if everything goes well, and then Andrew's going to kick it off.
All righty. Thanks, Matt. So as Matt mentioned, we are from Moss Adams. I'm a tax senior manager. I've historically worked in the oil and gas industry, and recently started shifting towards renewables. And so we got involved with CRES earlier this year. Looking forward to interacting with you all on a go-forward basis. I guess first off, we should say that, none of this construes tax advice. So if any of this applies to any of your individual tax issues, please consult your tax advisor. So I'm going to kick us off with kind of some historical oil and gas incentives and how those compare to renewable energy and where we're kind of moving as this legislation is passed. So some of the main things that we have seen in the oil and gas industry for years and years from a tax perspective are some of these benefits. One is intangible drilling costs. So I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of all the tax treatment and everything, but just to give you guys a quick background, intangible drilling costs are costs that are incurred to get an oil and gas well up to speed and producing. And that generally comprises about 60-80% of the actual cost of the well. But a huge incentive for the oil and gas industry is that those costs are immediately deductible. So with other tangible property, real estate, all those costs to get something up and running and placed into service generally are capitalized. And so with IDC, these are immediately deductible. But there have been several attempts over the years to stop that immediate deduction and require those costs to be capitalized. I believe there was even some language in the draft of the Build Back Better Act and maybe even the IRA that Biden was trying to put into place in order to stop that immediate deduction, as it's a pretty substantial benefit. There are some alternative minimum tax preferences related to IDC. I don't get into the nitty gritty of it, but generally for anybody that incurs significant amounts of IDC, you can end up in a tax position just because of that immediate deduction. So the IRS tries to come in and capture their portion of revenue because you get this immediate benefit for all these costs that would normally be capitalizable. Percentage depletion in excess of basis. So just allows a 15% deduction for depletion based on revenue over property past the capitalized basis of that well. And so it's a permanent benefit, meaning it's a tax-only deduction. It's really geared towards independent oil and gas producers, not necessarily big oil. So your Chevron, Exxon, Mobil, et cetera. Because generally depletion is calculated on a units of production method. Again, there's been attempts in the past to completely wipe out this depletion allowance, but the oil and gas lobby has deep pockets, as everyone knows. Marginal well credits, pretty straightforward. This legislation was enacted in 2004 with the American Jobs Creation Act, and it's still around, but it's really just not as common. It applies to older wells, which are nearly dried up. And so older producers of oil and gas, which have wells that were drilled years and years and years ago, can generate a credit to the extent any of their properties is producing less than 15 barrels a day. And that credit is about 50 cents per metric cubic foot of equivalent natural gas that is produced out of that property. Again, comparing some of these to the incentives in the renewable energy industry, obviously there's no deduction for generating energy from a solar panel or a wind turbine that has no remaining basis. So that's one thing that kind of stands out from an oil and gas perspective. And then there's no credits that exist for days where you can't produce any energy because it's cloudy or there's no wind to generate any to move any turbines. So next slide for me, Matt, if you don't mind. So this is a chart from the Joint Committee on Taxation. It kind of shows what the tax revenue would be if these deductions and credits weren't in place. And so as you can kind of see, the percentage depletion and expensing of IDC are substantial losses in revenue for the federal government. And this is just over an estimated amount over a 4-year period. So all in all, with these 5 different deductions, some of these don't necessarily apply to oil and gas, but they apply to clean coal or whatever you would call it. About $11.5 billion in tax revenues is lost because of these provisions in the tax code. Next slide for me, Matt. So how does the Inflation Reduction Act impact the oil and gas industry alone? Overall, oil and gas companies are expected to really pay more due to the legislation. I don't think that's going to have an impact on production, but it'll be interesting to see where we kind of end up in these next year when some of these provisions really take effect. Couple big things are the corporate minimum tax. So I think Moody's said that they're expecting only a total of 150 companies in the United States to actually be subject to this, but basically companies with book profits over $1 billion will pay a minimum corporate tax of 15% on their financial statement income. It's similar to the alternative minimum tax, if any of you are familiar with that, where the IRS is just trying to accelerate their tax revenue, but you do get a credit carry forward for any of this corporate minimum tax that you pay, and you can apply it against regular tax in the next year. Generally, it's expected to impact about 4 industries. The first being oil and gas, so your Shells, your Exxons, your Chevron, et cetera. Tech companies, chemical companies, and hotels and leisure are also going to be impacted. And hotels and leisure are also going to be impacted. Share buybacks. So I know everybody has kind of felt a little bit of pain at the pump recently. Gas prices aren't decreasing, even though oil companies are making record profits right now. And what are they doing with a lot of that money? They're buying shares back and putting cash back into their shareholders' pockets. Little bit of controversy over what was done with PPP funds, employee retention credits, and some other provisions of the CARES Act that came out during COVID. Lots of companies were actually buying shares back instead of spending that money on what they should have been spending on, what the grants were intended to be paid for. But these buybacks are going to be subject to a 1% excise tax. So you buy back 1 million shares at $10, you're subject to a 1% tax on whatever the cost of those shares were. Again, going to impact big oil and gas companies, but 1% is probably not going to swing the dial very much, but we'll see what happens and if this piece actually continues to rise in the future. Greenhouse gas emissions. So there is going to be an imposition of fees for emissions. So of course, this is going to impact heavy manufacturing, oil and gas, those kinds of industries that generate lots of pollution. It's going to start at $900 per metric ton, but eventually rise to $1,500 per metric ton. However, the IRA does include some provisions that allow some additional funds to be released for smaller companies that are going to be subject to these emission fees, because it's going to definitely cost some extra, have some additional capital outlays because of equipment that's going to have to be installed to capture these greenhouse gases. Next slide for me, Matt. Again, oil and gas lobby has deep pockets, and there's no way this legislation is going to pass without some incentives for them as well. So one big thing is they're going to get first dibs on federal lands. The bill prohibits leasing of federal lands and waters for renewable energy unless the government has offered at least 2 million acres of public land and 60 million in federal waters for oil and gas leasing during the prior year. I don't deal with a lot of offshore, but I know it's going to impact offshore pretty significantly. However, there are a couple kickers on this. Royalty rates on federal land. So in 1920, the Mineral Leasing Act was enacted, and those rates where the government is collecting royalties for extraction from federal land was 12%, 12.5%, and it hasn't risen since until this legislation. So it's a pretty big adjustment, but it's pretty clear that there are some disincentives going to be that are put in place to impact oil and gas producers and encourage companies to shift to greener energy. Additionally, the minimum oil and gas bids per acre rise from $2 to $10, which is a 500% increase. Some people think it's going to reduce the amount that oil and gas companies are going to be willing to bid for federal lands, but again, we'll see where we're kind of headed with production and investment from an oil and gas perspective. Carbon capture under 45Q is an entire presentation in and of itself, but the incentives are pretty significant. So any company can begin to sequester carbon oxide used in their business and claim credits for it. So it has to be verified by a third party that there's no leakage, and they have to measure the volume, et cetera. But it's usually injected back into the ground, and who's poised to inject anything into the ground better than the oil and gas industry. And so it's going to be a pretty significant opportunity for oil and gas producers to explore. The dollar incentives with the Inflation Reduction Act increased to $85 a ton for geological sequestration. So if you're drilling in a well in order to just inject carbon dioxide back into it, you get $85 a ton in a tax credit for that. And those can be sold on the open market. If you are generating CO2 and you are just recapturing it and reusing it in a business, you get $60 per ton. Additionally, companies can suck it out of the air. It's called direct air capture. And it is a costly process, but the legislation lowers the amount of emissions that are needed to qualify. So technology can become possible for use in significant industries where there's lots of CO2 emissions. So refining, cement, steel, any heavy manufacturers. The credit for direct air capture is actually about $180 per ton. So it's nothing to balk at. So again, where are we headed? I don't expect the IRA to really reduce oil and gas production. It's not going anywhere anytime soon, and we can't flip a switch overnight. But as the incentives continue to rise for transitioning to cleaner energy, I would expect to see some of the bigger players get involved and maybe even work in tandem with renewable energy companies. I know some of my clients in the oil and gas industry are already looking to make that shift and find some unutilized land they have leased or owned and put solar panels up. So I think there's going to be definitely some overlap as far as capital outlays and expenditures. And I think we'll see more of it as we start to shift towards greener energy. So that's kind of my piece covering what the Inflation Reduction Act looks like from an oil and gas perspective. Again, that's my background, and I'm trying to make this shift into renewables. And I had the pleasure of working with Matt a little bit. But I will let Matt take off and kind of give you guys some more insight as far as the IRA's production tax credits and some of the details that specifically impact renewables. So Matt, all you.
Andrew, thanks so much. This is actually a good slide to start on for me, a good segue. I mean, the last bullet you have here, big producers generating interest in renewables. I've heard from a former colleague, and I used to work for a large renewable energy company in Florida. I think the biggest in the country. But I'm hearing from them that there's some big oil companies making very favorable bids or large bids on renewable projects up in the Northeast, sort of outbidding a lot of people with more experience in the market. So it seems like that's absolutely happening already, is sort of jumping in, either themselves or perhaps partnering in some ways with more traditional renewables companies. But this is definitely a trend that's already started. So do want to take a step back because, not a lot of people deal with tax credits on a daily basis. So before we sort of get into the Inflation Reduction Act, just wanted to give you some, maybe like a primer or primer, however you say that, on sort of how these things generally work in two of the main categories. And there's different types of these two different categories that are sort of sprinkled throughout the Inflation Reduction Act. We're going to focus here tonight, given the limited time, on the electricity generation related credits, but there are other credits that are either directly related to renewables, like there's an advanced manufacturing credit, which allows a credit for sales of solar panels and battery components made in the United States and sold to third parties. There's a similar credit for investing in facilities that build those types of things in the United States. There's the carbon capture credits. There's a very lucrative nuclear production tax credit. And there's also hydrogen, which is sort of where green hydrogen in particular is the most lucrative type of credit, where you You actually take a clean resource like solar or wind, you send electricity through an electrolysis field, separate into water and hydrogen, and the hydrogen is stored and then can be used to power modified power plants in a clean way. So that's kind of down the road, that particular credit, but it's one of the credits that people talk about in the sort of second half of the 2020s into 2030s as being kind of really something that could take off. But so just to sort of get back to the two basic categories of credits, you kind of have investment tax credits, and then you have production tax credits. Investment tax credits are what they sound like. It's a credit that you can use against your taxes. So just a dollar for dollar credit against your taxes based on the amount of the investment in qualifying property. So if you build a solar facility in your backyard, and it costs $100, and it's, you paid all of that money for panels and other equipment related to the functioning of that system, you're going to get, under current law, 30%, under the IRA, I should say, a $30 tax credit. You get $30 you can offset dollar for dollar against your tax. When is it earned? It's earned when the asset starts operating commercially. So we call that placed in service for tax purposes. So it's earned in that year, and then you put it on that tax return, and it would reduce your taxes for that year. When you started construction is relevant. It's very relevant sort of pre-IRA because you only have 4 years to finish your project to earn credits. And so if you start construction, then you sort of need to finish within 4 years, even though the IRA has expanded the credits. They have not done away with that requirement. And it's also important because the IRA now conditions the full credit amount on satisfying the so-called wage and apprenticeship requirements. And that basically means you have to pay the people that build and sort of take care of the facility certain wages. And there has to be an apprenticeship program in place for the construction phase. So if you don't comply with those rules, your credit is reduced by 80%. So basically makes the investment not worth it. But the start of construction is important to that because the rules aren't out yet. And, it's probably going to be a few months before they're out. And those rules don't apply if you're able to start construction, which is kind of a term of art. You don't have to do that much to start construction on these projects. And so a lot of people are kind of racing to do that ahead of those wage and apprenticeship rules coming out. The ITC, it has a recapture period. So you earn the credit, but it sort of vests, I guess you could say, over a 5-year period, where if the project, if you sell it, if it burns down or there's other like an involuntary conversion of it, it stops working, it can't make money, and it sort of goes out of service. All of those things would cause a recapture of the ITC that you claimed, and then it would sort of phase down. So if you had that event happen in year 1, you lose 100%, year 2, 80%, 60%, so on and so on. You have to be careful with ITC. ITC assets are generally held in what are called tax equity partnerships. That's because a lot of people can't monetize the tax credits themselves because they don't have enough taxable income. So they'll partner with a tax equity investor. And then, you'll sometimes get tax exempt investors up either one of those chains. And that doesn't work so well in an ITC structure. So you have to be careful there. The ITC can be owned and operated by different parties. Sometimes you'll see an ITC asset that is owned by one entity and then leased to another, which is perfectly fine. And then even under pre-IRA law, you could choose which of the parties, either the owner or the lessee operator, to claim the credit. So that's different about the ITC. And the production tax credits, as they sound, are based on production, based on generation, electrical generation of your facility. In this case, we're talking about, renewable energy equipment. So the credit is earned annually. It's under current law and under the IRA, it's a 10-year period. So each year you report to the government how many megawatt hours of electricity your facility generated, and you multiply that by the applicable production tax credit rate, and that's an offset against that year's taxes. It does have to be made to sales do have to be made to unrelated parties. You can't just spin turbines in your backyard and not sell the power. That's not what they're trying to incentivize. Again, the start of construction date is relevant for the same reasons I mentioned. There's no recapture concept once you've generated the power. That's a good credit, assuming you've met the other requirements. It can't be recaptured later. You don't have to worry too much about tax exempt ownership. They can impact the ability to use accelerated depreciation, which is another benefit of these projects that existed under current law and existing law. So you have to be watch out for that, but it doesn't affect the credits. And then again, it has to be sold to an unrelated party, and it has to be owned and operated by the same party. So you can't lease the turbine to somebody else and claim the credits. So big changes. Once we sort of get those basic concepts, now a lot has changed with the Inflation Reduction Act, which used to be called the Build Back Better Act. It was, rebranded given the change in economic conditions. A lot of similar things. There are some differences, but unless you're really following this stuff closely, it's hard to tell. But this is essentially Build Back Better rebranded. You have what I would say are 6 major changes, and then maybe 50 or so little changes that people are geeking out on in the industry. But the big points are this dramatic expansion of the credits. So before the IRA, there was a phase down that was built into the law, and it was kind of keyed on the start of construction date. So like if you started construction in 2019, you'd get 80% of the full, or 100% of the full credit. 2020, you get 80%, and then 60% if you started in 21, and so on and so on. Now, if you start construction whenever, as long as you're placing in service after 21, you're going to get the full credit amount. We'll talk about what that is in a minute. Assuming you meet, once the wage and apprenticeship requirements come out, you'd have to meet those to get the full credit amounts. But you have this through at least 2033. So you have at least 12 years where people can count on, okay, I know if I just hit the wage and apprenticeship rules, I'm going to get this amount of credits. There's no phase down. And so with that, that really allows for long-term capital planning and investment. And so I think that's really going to open the doors to not only the existing developers, but also the larger oil and gas players, and a number of people, even smaller companies that are looking for a distributed generation solution. So that's a big deal. The wage and apprenticeship requirements are a big deal. It's going to be an administrative nightmare. If you think about, these are pretty large construction operations, and sort of there's subcontractors, you sort of have to weave all the way through that to see whether those rules are met, and sort of verify that and build it into all the contracts. So that's a big deal. And the credits are, again, almost worthless without it. So that's going to be important. You may have noticed that I kept saying wind turbine with respect to the production tax credits. That's because solar did not qualify for production tax credits until the IRA. And essentially other clean tech after 24 is also going to qualify for. So as new technologies are developed, they're also going to be able to sort of pick ITC or PTC. And that's an interesting sort of decision point because, there's a number of factors. I mean, ITC, you get the credit up front, which can help sort of reduce your need for, capital for debt investment or equity investment up front. The PTC is generally more lucrative over time because just the way the numbers work out, especially if there's a good resource, if there's a lot of sun in that area or a lot of wind in that area, PTC is going to be better. But then one thing that can switch it back to ITC is that there's now bonus credits, which are calculated differently on the ITC. So it's the difference between percentage points and percentage. So the bonus credits would get you like a 10 percentage point increase on your ITC. So you go from 30 to 40% ITC, which is like can't do the math, but it's like a 33% increase or something. Whereas the PTC is, like a percentage, just a pure percentage. So you'd get a 10% increase on your PTC. If your PTC is $27 a megawatt hour, now it's $29.70 a megawatt hour. So, you have to kind of take into account all these things when you're sort of deciding which credit you're going to claim. So that's a big deal. Another big deal is that, you can't sort of fully build out renewables grid without significant amounts of energy storage, including battery storage. And so the Inflation Reduction Act allows you to build those storage facilities. And even if they're not charged all the time by solar, that they can still qualify for the ITC. Before, it was only those storage facilities that were charged almost exclusively by other ITC assets. And so now you're able to sort of use grid power when you need to. If the solar is not generating, you can get the power from other places to charge that battery and then deploy it at the right time of day or night when the prices are high to make it economic. So that's a big deal to sort of the expansion of the renewable grid. Biogas, we're seeing a lot of projects already with using animal byproducts and dairy and things like that to convert into natural gas. It's called renewable natural gas. And that can power power plants. It can be transported in tanks across the country and sort of be decoupled from where it's generated. And so that also qualifies now for ITC. And so that's I think going to be a big deal. Microgrid controllers, there's probably a smaller deal. There's also I always forget what it's called, dynamic glass or thermochromatic glass, something like that. Thermochromic. I'm screwing that up, but anyway, it's basically glass that's hooked up to a machine that kind of gives it changes the tint based on the outside conditions and makes buildings more efficient in their energy usage. So that also attracts ITC now. Talked a little bit about the bonus credits. The two sort of more common ones are going to be domestic content, which is, you're sourcing your steel and your iron from the United States, and a certain percentage of your manufactured components are made of domestic materials. If you do that, you get a 10% credit. Energy communities, this is where there's two types. One is where a coal or similar plant shut down within a certain time period. Then there's another one that's going to be a list provided by Treasury of certain communities that they feel have been, I guess, harmed by the energy transition. The other one for low income and tribal lands, it's for smaller projects. It's for 5 megawatts and below, but it's up to 20%. So you could go on that one from a 30% ITC or 50% ITC if you're hitting those other two bonuses, up to a 70% ITC. So you're getting, 70% of your investment back within a year, which is pretty good deal. The other big thing, as far as we talked about monetization, historically, it's really been only tax equity, these complicated structures with financial institutions. Now you're able to, tax equity is going to be good still going to be good for a lot of the bigger players. It's going to be more efficient, but direct pay does provide an option for certain taxpayers. With carbon capture, really anyone can get direct pay. And what direct pay is, it's basically whether you have tax or not, you get a refundable credit. So you just get a cash payment from the government. It's treated as if you overpaid your tax, and then you're owed a refund in the amount of the credit. So with respect to these energy credits, the clean electricity credits, it only applies to tax exempts and like rural cooperatives. And so that's interesting, because you have a lot of universities and cooperative utilities that sort of can take advantage of that now, where they haven't in the past. And then the other big thing that goes along with that is transferability, where you can sell the credits just outright to third parties. So if we work at a big accounting firm, if we know people that pay a lot of taxes, we can hook them up with people that have these credits, and those are not restricted. So any sort of two taxpayers can sort of sell and buy credits from each other. The thought is that it's not efficient as tax equity, because number one, there's probably going to be, we're anticipating a bigger discount on those credits, and then also you can't monetize the depreciation when you're just selling credits, which is also valuable, where you can do that in a tax equity transaction. But it's kind of like for smaller players, or if for whatever reason you can't get tax equity financing, you may be able to just sell the credits. So it's kind of like a backstop option for a lot of people. How much does it cost? So oops, go back one. So this is from the Joint Committee of Taxation. These are just the credits we're going to talk about here in a minute. The total bill on the, I think if you add these up, there's about 120 billion over 10 years. That's the highlighted in red. But the total cost, including the carbon capture, the residential credits, the nuclear credit, some of the clean vehicle credits, I think that was about 370 billion. So, comparing to over 10 years, and then I think it skyrockets even after that. So, you're talking about a lot of money, obviously a big transfer of wealth. So the credits tonight, I think about 120 billion is probably conservative. But let's talk about what those are. So a little bit about the production tax credit. This is, again, now it's applicable to solar, wind, hydro, a number of different technologies, 10 years of production. The other thing with the expansion of the credits is that people are looking to repower or take old facilities and sort of dress them up and say, hey, you know what, we've got a new facility now. We're going to claim 10 more years of tax credits now that we have this long runway. So that's going to be something that you're going to see as well, as sort of a refurbishment of old facilities, and then saying, hey, now it's a new facility and we're qualifying for 10 more years of credits. We're seeing that already. But the dollar amount, it's a sort of a formula that's in the act. It's kind of hard to follow, but I think if you follow it, you get to $27.50 a megawatt hour in 22. And then it's index for inflation thereafter. And that's the full credit amount. And it is conditioned on the wage and apprenticeship rules when they come out being met. Obviously, if you start construction soon, you can avoid those. The prevailing wage requirements, They are not only during construction, they are also during the 10-year PTC period. And so that doesn't include things like regular O&M, but it does include sort of major repairs. Apprenticeship requirement is during construction only. You've got these two bonus credits that we mentioned: the domestic content, if placed in service after 22, the domestic content and the energy community. There is also for smaller projects, there is the low income and tribal lands credit as well. This type of credit is transferable after 22. And it could be, you could have an older wind farm, right, from, placed in service 5 years ago. But it's credits that it generates in 23, they'd be able to sell them if they were, otherwise unable to monetize them. You do have direct pay to the extent you are tax exempt. So, you have a Alaska Native corporation that has a wind farm. They're going to be able to get cash payments for those credits. And then after 24, really, these credits basically convert to the clean energy production tax credit. And that is applicable not only to these technologies, but also to technologies that are developed in the future, as long as they have a very minimal amount of emissions. It's basically zero and just a little bit more. So, and there is a recapture if you are found to have gone over that very small threshold of emissions. So that would sort of be after 24. But the credit amount doesn't really change other than inflation. And again, credits through at least 2033. And then I say potentially thereafter, because after that, it's sort of keyed to how much we've reduced emissions in that period of time. So if things go well, there will be a phase down in the credits. If things don't go so well, then the credits would continue on at sort of full amount. Investment tax credit, as I mentioned, it was phasing down. It was, I think, if you started construction in 22, it was going to be, I want to say 22%. And then I think thereafter it was going down to 10%. So this is a big deal, going to 30% through at least 2033. Again, provided you meet those wage and apprenticeship requirements. If you don't, you're down to 6%. This big extension to storage and renewable natural gas and others. When you have these new types of property, because your tax credit is based on your investment in eligible property, the question is, well, what is eligible property in a renewable gas facility, for example? What is it in a electrochromic glass that's installed in a building? That one seems pretty simple, but the biogas facilities can be kind of complicated. It's not exactly clear what part of that facility would qualify for credits. Again, the bonus credits, they're more lucrative for investment credit purposes because they're percentage points rather than sort of a percentage increase. And then, as with the PTC, domestic content, a lot of questions there on sort of what exactly what exactly they apply to. We know it applies to raw materials, but a lot of questions about sort of the manufactured components aspect of it. And then energy communities, as I mentioned, the Treasury is going to put out a list, and no one knows where they're going to be as of now. And there's the bonus credits for the small facilities that are located in low-income areas and tribal lands. Again, transferable after 22, direct pay available for tax exempts after 22. And then these also will be converted to sort of a clean energy what they call technology neutral type credit after 24. And that's all we had. And I think we're going to start with a little Q&A, unless Andrew, you had anything else to add?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. Appreciate it, Matt.
Okay.
Looks like we had one question pop up in the chat. What will the government do with carbon emission fees they collect per ton? So I think this is referring to the greenhouse gas fees. Specifically, it's targeting methane. As far as what the government's going to do with it, that's a good question. I think right now it's supposedly going to be treated as an excise tax. And just, I don't know that it's earmarked specifically for anything, whether that's going to be re-injected back into the EPA or anything like that. So stay tuned.
There are actually quite a few more questions. There's only the one in the public area, but I'll just take it down the list. And by the way, thank you for that very informative presentation. Let's see. First question. One of our members is asking, are the wage and apprenticeship requirements going to apply to all solar categories, including residential, C&I, and utility?
I actually don't know the answer to the residential question, but they would apply to both C&I and utility scale.
Okay. All right. Let's see the next question. This individual is asking about, I guess, why a wind farm can't claim both an ITC and a PTC. Why not?
So under current law, that it's not it wasn't possible. I don't think there was some changes in the law between 18 and 20 where they were and then they weren't. But clearly under the IRA, you have the option, right? So, and that's particularly important for like offshore wind, which is like super, super expensive. So usually the investment tax credit is more lucrative. And so, you know, certainly going forward, you do have your sort of pick PTC or ITC. Very rarely it's going to be better for onshore wind. Generally, PTC is going to be better. Just because of the way that the economics work out. But on offshore wind, given the very high cost of building those facilities, people expect the ITC to be more chosen.
Okay. One of our members is relaying that they purchased a natural gas stove, replaced their natural gas stove with an electric one. And they're wondering if there's a tax credit that they can claim in that situation.
That's a good question.
I don't know. There are a lot of credits for individuals.
There are, yeah. I don't know off the top of my head. But definitely, you know, I know one thing was heat pumps has been a hot topic recently. There have been some incentives for putting those into your house because they're much more efficient for heating your home. As far as switching from natural gas to an electric stove, I don't know, but I'd be happy to look into it.
Okay, you could maybe post that information to me, and then I could pass the information along.
Sure.
All right. Another one of our individuals is wondering if you could talk about the residential credits for energy efficiency. Well, and here we go, heat pumps. Do they apply to projects completed in 2022 or only 2023?
No. There's so many things that are effective after 21, and then there's so many things that are effective after 22. I'd have to look at that, and we can follow up with that, but I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Okay. Let's see what's next here. This individual is asking if the tax incentive increases, such as the building on tribal land and so on, will it apply to solar panel manufacturing too?
Yes, there is a for the advanced manufacturing production tax credits we talked about, there are incentives for where you're putting those facilities, and also, yeah, I mean, obviously it has to be domestic content, so there's no bonus for that, but there is for where you put those plants. So those manufacturing credits are very lucrative, and we're seeing a lot of people sort of rush into that area.
Okay, another one of individuals is wondering about EVs, if there's any provisions or credits and so on for, I presume, purchasing EVs versus, maybe we should address it that way, purchasing EVs versus manufacturing. Maybe there's I'm going to expand a bit there.
Yeah, so certainly, I mean, on the individual side, you know, there used to be, prior to this law, there were caps per manufacturer. So I think, like, you know, like California, you know, states give certain credits, but I think the federal credits were kind of capped out based on manufacturer. So like Tesla was capped out. I don't think you could get a federal credit. I think those caps have been eased in a lot of cases. So I think the credit for purchasing an EV, a personal EV, is going to be easier to obtain going forward. And then I think there are large incentives for fleet vehicles. So, you know, city buses and trucks of all kinds. And those, I think those can be up to $200,000 for heavy trucks. So that's going to be a big thing. And we're already seeing a lot of municipalities, and particularly in Canada and the West Coast, really switching or making investments in sort of a renewable fleet of buses or trucks and utility vehicles.
Okay. All righty. We've got several more questions. Just reading this one over. This individual apparently snuck into a CCUS conference at Colorado School of Mines. If
Hooligans in here.
we won't reveal any names here. This person's impression is oil and gas industries are using the IRA to do grab subsidies for unrealistic carbon capture projects such as greenwashing. The only thing they really care about it extending the life of coal and oil and gas production, and to produce CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. That's the limit of their interest, is this person's impression. Any comment or additional information on that?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that their motives were more pure, but you know, I think that that's right. And I think even more than that, I think the process around building these facilities and having access to the emission facility and having access to technology to store it, or you know, and then also to get financing, because I think there's a lot of uncertainty there. Who can do all that and work through all that complexity? Probably the bigger oil companies. And I think that they're going to spend money and they're going to take advantage of these subsidies. And, you know, I think they probably had a hand in sort of these provisions getting in there, and the increased credit amounts. And, you know, I think it will be, I think a lot of people have big dreams about the carbon capture stuff, a lot of smaller players, but I'm concerned that at least in the early going, it's going to be mostly the big guys and sort of doing it for enhanced oil recovery and things like that.
Exactly. I'd agree there. And I think one thing to remember is that there's a cap on the carbon sequestration credit. I don't know the exact dollar amount, but once a certain amount of CO2 has actually been captured, no other taxpayers can claim it. So you're going to see the bigger guys who have the funds to invest in those processes, they're going to be the ones to claim it first.
All righty. Make sure this next question wasn't already addressed. Looks like that one was addressed. Can certain types of oil and gas credits, namely the IDC, be pivoted to support geothermal development? It's ONG. I presume that's oil and gas.
Oil and gas, yes, correct. So the intangible drilling costs is not really a credit. It is more of the fact that you get to immediately deduct these costs for putting real property into service. So let's say you're building let's say you're in the real estate space or manufacturing space, and you're making a giant piece of equipment. All the costs incurred to get that piece of equipment into place have to be capitalized and captured through depreciation. Now, the fact that bonus depreciation exists right now, you can write off 100% of costs of most assets as long as they're not a building. However, the big incentive that's historically been good for the oil and gas industry is the immediate deducting of those intangible drilling costs because they have no salvageable value. It's not necessarily a credit. Now, as far as geothermal, that's a good question. I have not had a lot of experience in the geothermal space yet, but generally the IDC deduction is specifically reserved for production of oil and natural gas.
Okay. All right, the next question. Does the new transferability of tax credits mean there will be more and lower cost finance options for solar and renewables?
Yeah, definitely more, because now you can sell the credits, but lower cost, I'm not sure. It may be different markets, right? It may be sort of bigger players, utility scale projects continue to use tax equity because the returns to the investor are not so high, and you're able to monetize depreciation. So if you can sort of stomach the legal fees of sort of getting the deal together, probably that market remains relatively the same. Smaller players are going to like the fact that they can just, either through their advisor or through relationships, maybe link up with someone that has taxable income and just sell the credit. It may not be that easy because now you've got to worry about, well, who's guaranteeing the credit? What if it gets recaptured? Who's going to sort of make the buyer whole? So that it's not going to be without legal or transaction expenses. You may need to buy tax credit insurance, right? If you're not if you don't have a credit worthy seller. So I see it as kind of two different markets. I think ultimately the transferability market will start out slow. I think there'll be big discounts, and then maybe over time, as people get comfortable with it, maybe the insurance products improve. Maybe you sort of have a lesser discount, and then maybe you do start to compete a little bit with some of the tax equity. But again, it's hard to overcome sort of not being able to monetize the depreciation if you sell the credits. It's kind of eats into your returns.
Okay. Let's see. Would a federal opportunity zone count as a low income area for bonus credits?
Yeah, so people are thinking that the low income areas are going to be basically coterminous with the qualified opportunity zone. So I think that's a good assumption. Until the guidance comes out.
Okay. I think I asked this out of order. I'll go ahead and read the questions just prior to that. Does the IRA have fees for different pollution types? This individual noted that the deck only mentioned methane.
Right now, as far as I'm aware, it's only methane. And that's specifically geared towards oil and gas producers or liquefied natural gas plants and things like that.
Okay. For those who rent, they can't get landlord approval. How do you work with that? With that in an HOA, who have to buy and pay the fee to get anything approved?
This is for like what, solar panels on a roof or something?
I believe so.
It sounds like an HOA issue, which
Yeah.
I'm familiar with, and I don't envy anyone that has those issues.
All righty. Is there a tax credit available for pairing residential EV chargers with home solar? This person's already done this, but they're offering, but is offering an upcoming clinic to show people the path that this individual took to energy independence. Yeah.
As long as the rooftop and the battery are kind of part of the same unit, they should both qualify for the residential credit. So I think that people feel pretty good about that. But there's nothing, I don't think there's anything comparable. Like we talked about now that there's standalone battery ITC, I don't think there's anything like that in the residential context. So it would kind of have to be part of your rooftop setup.
Okay. Here, I think this next point is more of a comment. Martin, are you asking me to post this message in the general chat? It says, please share the NRDC. Please share that the NRDC has an Inflation Reduction Act guide, and there's a link. Is that what you're intending here, Martin? I don't know if can you unmute? Or do I have to unmute you?
Yeah, that's what I intended.
All right.
Mhm.
Let me do that right now. All right, folks. Here it comes. All right, going on. Oh, yes, I see you responded, Martin. All right. Does the Inflation Reduction Act stipulate how the CO2 that is sequestered and stored would be measured and verified? Or is that left to the IRS to determine and is currently to be determined?
Yeah, it has to be verified by the third party. I mean, there are, as far as I'm aware, you can internally do it, but the general consensus is going to be that you need some sort of verification. And the IRS relies on internal engineers, and I mean, they have engineers for the oil and gas space that kind of can read reserve reports and things like that. So I would imagine they're going to probably have somebody that will specialize in reading reports as far as carbon sequestration, hydrogen production, some of these newer incentives that are available.
All righty. That's the end of the questions that appear in the chat. Are there any other questions? You can either type them in there, or I think we're okay if somebody wants to unmute themselves and sort of blurt out, as long as we don't have chaos. Here's one. Ryan, do you want to ask it, or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, I can ask. Okay, so that penalty that I heard Arvid specified for natural gas leakage or methane leakage, does that pertain only to leaky gas wells, or is that also for food producers throwing in a lot of restaurants throwing in a lot of food where it goes into a landfill, rots, and produces enormous amounts of methane gas?
Yeah, so right now it's really only geared towards the oil and gas industry.
Okay.
There's a list of about 8 specific industry types that I can send out, and it is all related to oil and gas production, storage, transportation, and things like that.
Okay, yeah, not that I want to see restaurants penalized, mind you. I just, would like to see some kind of counterbalance or try to incentivize people not to throw away so much food, because
Food wastage is a big deal. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, we've got a big problem with food insecurity in Boulder County. It's serious, and city and county of Denver as well. Just it seems like we could solve 2 problems at the same time.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, anything else out there? I see somebody appearing here. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to mention something. Somebody asked about whether there's easier financing. And in a way there is. As I learned, there are some credit unions who will, if you're doing such an investment as an individual or a small business, they will split the interest that you're paying, and for the 30% that will be picked up by the IRA once you do your taxes, they give you a very low interest rate, whereas you have a pretty normal interest rate on the remaining 60%. So that is something that you have to ask or know about, though. Not many financial institutions are doing this. And I know that CRES is actually starting to work with a credit union. I forgot the name of it, but if you're a CRES member, you can also become a member of that credit union, and they offer such conditions.
Yeah, that's helpful. Also, if you're buying, the installers will also finance as well, and sort of allow you to use that credit to sort of pay down the balance too. So that's another option.
What else have we got out there? Nothing, huh? All right. I'm going to post my email address in the chat. And for additional questions, you may email them to me. And I can then forward them on to Matthew and Andrew.
Yep.
And I'll try to get a copy of some of these questions that were asked earlier on, and see if we can get some follow up on those questions.
Great.
And let's see, it looks like I may have missed something. I did miss, looks like I missed a question. Don't know how. I see a couple questions I somehow missed. I don't understand that. Okay. Sorry, a couple more. How
Sure.
does our speaker group see large property portfolio owners best leveraging the new Inflation Reduction Act, given that they may be non-tax entities or funds?
I'll give you one example. REITs have historically not been able to own these assets because they can't make use of the credits. And so what they could do is own the assets as part of their portfolio, or on the buildings or distributed generation, whatever the case may be, and then sell the credits to third parties. That income from selling the credits under this IRA is tax exempt, or it doesn't go into their income. And so it doesn't affect their qualification as a REIT, because that wouldn't be good REIT income. And so there are some provisions that kind of allow for, real property companies to enjoy these benefits. And then, there's also a question of if you can sell the credits, do these passive activity loss rules not apply to the buyer? So could individuals participate as well? And that's an open question that hopefully is resolved in regulations. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. If that were to happen, that would really open the sort of fund market for individuals to participate in this sort of thing. So we'll just have to wait and see on that. But I think real estate, for sure, I think it goes well now with renewables and a lot of structures.
All right, a couple more. It looks like when doing a residential solar project and the roof needs to be replaced, can the roof also qualify for the tax credit if it is required to complete the project?
No, I've heard that one a lot. You maybe someone can write you an opinion, but I don't think I would be able to get there yet. I think it's probably a bridge too far. It's not really part of the solar system.
And then I think this is next part is maybe a follow-up on the question I just asked, or this individual just asked. GAF makes a solar shingle where this is required. I don't know if that.
Replacing the roof is required?
Well, I wonder if GF makes the solar GAF must make a solar shingle. So there's the way I read it is they're one and the same. But
Well,
Joel, do you want to unmute yourself and clarify that if I butchered that question or that comment?
Yeah, I can. So I actually own a roofing company, and we're going solar. So we partnered up with GAF, which is a shingle manufacturer, and they make a new nailable shingle. And a lot of the roof actually has to be either replaced. You can't really do a portion because it's a different type of shingle that houses come on, because the face of the nailable shingle is a different width. So you do have to replace the entire roof when putting that nailable solar shingle down.
Oh, the shingle itself is the solar panel?
That's interesting.
Yeah, I wish I had one with me. I have one in my office right now, and I actually wasn't in the office. I was actually out sick today. But yeah, GAF, you can look up online. It's GAF Energy, and they're actually a separate entity now. And they just came out with this nailable solar shingle, which lays flat on the roof. So when we're replacing the roof, we're going back with a solar shingle, and we're actually installing this nailable solar shingle. And then GAF is now taking that, hooking up the electricity and all that stuff, coming in behind us and hooking everything up. Homeowners are still getting the tax credit. It's kind of a gray area where we read it right now, where it can be, because I send you basically a bill for your solar system. That's going to include that part of the roof, which is actually part of the solar system because it's all in one. But I was looking for some clarity in that. I know it's a little strange right now, and it's definitely what it sounds like is a gray area. But I was looking to get some clarity on that from you guys possibly. But if you do look it up online, you can find it. It just came out. It's been on the market for the past maybe 6 months in Colorado, and first came out in California about a year ago. So
yeah, I mean, I'd be concerned if you're building in other costs that are different from the solar system or different from the in excess of the panels, like roof replacement costs and things like that. And then you kind of give the customer an undifferentiated bill. and then say, okay, go claim ITC on that. I think I'd be worried about that. I mean, I'd want some before you start doing that. I definitely want sort of a law firm or accounting firm to sort of maybe do some analysis on that and give them some comfort that works.
Yeah, I appreciate that. From what we hear is it's still a gray area, and our market is, possibly hail damage sometimes for us roofers. And we've been working with several roofing or solar companies actually, and we're doing their repairs because all of these solar companies don't know how to install the brackets correctly to waterproof the roof. And then we have to come back in and try and save the day and, take the panels that they just put on or been on for a few years and creating leaks and issues and stuff like that. So this is supposed to alleviate that a little bit. And GAF is a huge company and they're a great company. So they're trying to kind of lead the market in that. But
I'm gonna look into that. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it is.
I agree.
They're great. And I actually have a max power buyout or buyback, excuse me, where they'll guarantee their customers their production on their energy. And if not, they pay you back actually that. So the warranties, I could share something with you guys if I get your email and send you kind of what their layout is of their guarantees and their warranty stuff. So they're kind of setting the bar right now with that nailable shingle. It's pretty interesting.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
One of our members is offering, I'm reading it as a tip. It says it's something about easier financing. Various credit unions, like the one that CRES members can join, offer split financing, a very low rate for the portion that will be refunded by the Inflation Reduction Act, and a regular higher one for the other 60%, and he says it saves a lot, saves big time. Let's see. Here's another question. What tax incentives should I plan to leverage on my rental properties? And he offers his appreciation. She offers her appreciation for what you're talking about this evening. So what tax incentives should she plan to leverage her rental properties?
You've got, the residential solar, you've got the energy efficiency, AC and things like that. Trying to think what else. I'm not sure the electric stove. I'm not sure that works. But I mean, from a dollar standpoint, I think the solar battery combo, I think, is probably one of the bigger ones.
Okay. You covered that one. This next question, hopefully we don't. Is Mike still on the call here? I don't think I see Mike. Make sure. It's concerning. I'm not sure what the question is in the context of, but it says, so this is for the rich to make more money and the poor with HOA to stay broke. I wonder if this is in the context of the question regarding what do I do regarding my landlord and the HOA. You want me to go back and read that one? If I can find it. Well, unfortunately, Mike's not here at the moment. Let me look down the list here. This may be all, wait, no, we have some more questions and we've got about 7 minutes left. I like to end on time. Can both the Inflation Reduction Act and the PTC credits be sold? Ask this individual.
ITC and PTC can be sold after 22.
Okay. Little, maybe save this last point for last, but looks like we have one more question. Then I'm going to make actually, I'm going to go ahead and make the plea right now, and then we'll get to the last question while I can hold your attention. CRES is looking for a volunteer treasurer. Should any of you feel so inclined to join our board. So we're looking for such an individual. You have my email address, and you have the MDCRES address. You can post your interest there. We're having this, I believe this is true for the entire state, but the state CRES level, there are, this is the time when we're holding elections, and we have the changeover. So if anyone's interested, please let us know. And here's for the last question. This individual is asking if during the presentation, if it was mentioned that older systems can reapply for tax credits, and if so, how would that work?
Yeah, so if something's already been placed in service, it's been operating, it's kind of under the old rules. So this is for facilities. A lot of this is for facilities that place in service after 21. And then a lot of the bonus provisions and sort of transferability, kind of the new features, are for after 22. But I did mention briefly that, there are a lot of people who are looking at, and people have done this with wind turbines. They kind of take the generator up in the top of the wind turbine, or they put some longer blades up there. And then if they spend enough money, they say, oh, I didn't build a whole new turbine, but this is really a new turbine for tax purposes. And so I'm going to claim another 10 years of PTCs. And now with the solar PTC being an option going forward, we think we're going to see that on, people buying sort of old solar plants and making some tweaks to them and saying, aha, now I've got a new solar plant, and I'm going to claim 10 more years of credit. So that you could see how that could kind of get to be maybe abusive or aggressive. And so, maybe that will lead to more regulations. But I could see people doing that.
All right, we've got 3 minutes left. If there are no further questions, maybe shout them out. You've got 3 minutes to do so. Anybody got anything? Outstanding. All right, I'll take the silence as a no. Matthew and Andrew, very much appreciated. Very much appreciate what you guys were talking about tonight. Very timely and very needed. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for the invite.
Looking forward to getting involved with you guys more.
Absolutely.
Right. Us too.
Thanks so much.
All
Guys,
right.
thanks so much for coming. Have a good night.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, have a good night.
Night.